Welcome to the Customer Wins podcast, where business leaders discuss their secrets and techniques for helping their customers succeed and in turn grow their business.
Hi, I'm Rich Walker, the host of the Customer Wins, where I talk to business leaders about how they help their customers win and how their focus on customer experience leads to growth. Today is a special episode in my Perspective series where I talk to people who bring a completely different perspective to our show. Some of the past guests in this series have included Bobby Steiner Golf Academy, Rocky's Custom Clothes, and Alamo Drafthouse Cinemas. Today, I'm speaking with Dan Trommater, magician and keynote speaker. And today's episode is brought to you by Quick, the leader in enterprise forms processing. When your business relies upon processing forms, don't waste your team's valuable time manually reviewing the forms. Instead, get Quick. Using our Form Extract API, simply submit your completed forms and get back clean, context-rich data that is 99.9% accurate. Visit quickforms.com to get started. All right, I'm really excited to introduce today's guest because this could be a lot different than our typical show. Dan Trommater empowers his clients to challenge assumptions so they can see new possibilities and get unstuck. He's a speaker, facilitator, coach, and magician who has presented at over 1,000 events in the past 2 decades, including a TEDx talk. He uses his skill as a magician to help people tap into their sense of wonder so they can find new solutions to their pressing problems. Dan, welcome to the Customer Wins.
Hey, Rich. I am delighted to be with you today.
We're excited to have you. So for those of you who haven't heard this podcast before, I talk with business leaders about what they're doing to help their customers win, how they built and deliver a great customer experience, and the challenges to growing their own company. Dan, we want to understand your business a little bit better. How do you help people?
A number of different ways. Primarily, I help people get unstuck, whether that means I'm doing a keynote address at a conference, or I'm doing coaching, or I'm doing a workshop. I'm really passionate about helping people see new perspectives, different ways of looking at the situations that they've looked at for years. And I'm very fortunate to have some pretty powerful tools at my disposal. I've been a magician for, 25 years. And so I'm really fortunate to have that tool to be able to not only engage people, but illustrate these ideas in a way that I can't with just words alone.
So I have to admit something. My father is a magician. I grew up with magic in my house. I've been to the Magic Castle several times, and it was always check out this trick. And it was just this amazement of, how did you do that? And I know some of the secrets, which we're not going to reveal secrets on this episode, so don't worry. But I think it is an amazing tool that you get to use. What drew you into magic to change people's view of reality?
You know, it was kind of a natural evolution. So I went to school for photography, and not long after I started to teach photography. At that time, I met the woman who's now my wife, and her father is an amateur magician. That's how I got into magic. I didn't become a magician until I was an adult, which I think is an uncommon path for magicians. Usually they get a magic set for Christmas when they're 7 and their lives change. So I got a later start. It was a hobby. It was just for fun. But because I was teaching in the classroom, I realized, well, I've got a captive audience to practice on. And I realized, well, if I can start my classes with a magic trick, maybe I'll get people to show up on time. And so I let everybody in the class know, listen, if you're here on time, I do a trick. If you're not, you miss it, and I won't repeat that trick for the rest of the semester. And oh man, my attendance rates skyrocketed, my tardiness went way down. And so I realized, ooh, there's something here. There's something here. I wasn't using it to convey a message. I was just using it to engage people. But I realized there's power in this tool. And it wasn't too long before I realized, you know, I can use this to illustrate ideas in a way that words alone can't. So the first thing I did, because it was a photography class, I was talking about light and the different colors of light. And so I got 3 different little silk scarves of the primary colors of light, and I made them disappear and reappear and go here and there and change and things like that. And boy, you could just see in the looks of people, not only were they, amazed and impressed and engaged, they started to get what I was actually communicating
Mm-hmm.
in a way that, it's pretty abstract how light interacts with different colors, and a little abstract. This way they got to see it in real form, and that really changed things. That then led me just slowly over time to start doing, I started doing magic shows. Loved that. Loved doing magic shows. I left photography, was doing magic. I moved to LA. I studied at the Magic Castle, which, for people who don't know, the Magic Castle is a private nightclub for magicians in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I just got back. I was in LA last week performing there again, which is such a
Nice.
luxury. Yeah. So moved to LA, really poured myself into the art of magic, learning as much as I could about the skills, the physical skills of how the tricks work, but also what it takes to be a magician, which is not just the tricks, but it's the communication and the presentation of the magic. Moved back away from LA, started doing magic shows, and very soon realized this is too good of a tool to only do entertainment. I mean, I truly do believe that we need more wonder in our lives, and magic
Mm-hmm.
can really serve that purpose. And it's a deep and important mission, to add wonder to the world,
So do you
especially
think that
nowadays.
when you say that people should have more wonder, what is it exactly about that? Is it inspiration, innovation? Is it curiosity? What is it you're inspiring with wonder?
That's a great question. Um, I really think that it's it's too it's too hard for me to answer that, because I don't know exactly what each person needs. All I can say is what I'm hoping to convey. Well, first of all, the research has showed that the experience of awe and wonder boosts our well-being. It gives us lower blood pressure, it boosts our dopamine. It really has a lot of physical and mental side effects. Um, we get a lot of wonder and awe from nature,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't spend very much time in nature. And so through magic, that sense of wonder and awe can be triggered, that really gives similar benefits to looking at a starry sky, or watching a bug crawl across a leaf.
So, Dan, I'm thinking about this in terms of I typically talk about how businesses are trying to get the best customer experience and customer journey. But part of what I think all people want with their customer is that sense of wonder. I think, like a financial advisor, I think would be serving a client better if the client cared more, was more interested in the things that they were talking about. And how do they inspire that? How do they get them to say, I want to know more about taxes, which is typically a very boring thing that people don't want to know about. But my gosh, how powerful can it be to change your tax structures? Or if you're selling a financial tool to financial advisors, like a lot of the fintechs do, how do they get their customers to say, man, I need to think about that? So that's why I'm asking about this idea of wonder. How do we inspire more wonder in others? Your use of magic, I think, is really innovative, but what else do you think about this?
Well, what comes to mind is, so just last week when I was in Los Angeles, my best friend from university came out to celebrate his 50th birthday with me. And he's not a magician. He's not in that world at all. He's seen me
Mm-hmm.
do some magic, but that's it. But he got exposed in a deep level to a lot of magic. We went to the Magic Castle a whole bunch. We went to an illusion builder's workshop. We went to one of the largest collections of magic posters in the world. And so he got immersed in this world. And he thinks it's cool, but he doesn't care, right? I mean, he's not like already invested. But by seeing me and the proprietors of these two different collections, uh, so enamored with it, and so obviously invested in this kind of obscure, esoteric thing, even though Nat was not particularly invested in it, by seeing somebody who really was, he was compelled to be more interested. Like when you see somebody who just absolutely loves stamp collecting and can tell you all about all the stamps and about where this one came from and who designed it. And like, you may not care about stamps, but by seeing somebody so in love with something, it makes you realize that there's something more there that maybe you could be interested in.
Okay, you just inadvertently revealed a magician's secret. And that is that the magician is so passionate about the craft of magic, they inspire people and draw people and attract people. I mean, you can't get away from somebody who's really, really into magic because they'll want to show you the next thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's something very infectious about deep passion.
Yeah, there is. So I find that if you have a true passion about what you do, people want to hear about it. I often joke, people don't invite me to come speak at conferences because who wants to hear about forms? But if you're talking to me one-on-one about the problem you have with forms, my gosh, I'm so excited about it. And it's the most mundane thing in the world, but we can have a great conversation around it. So I want to come back to something else you said. What you help people do is get unstuck. And I'm curious, do people always know they're stuck, or do you help them see that too?
No, I don't think people always know they're stuck. Not at all. Occasionally they do, and then that's really easy because where there's a will, there is a way. If people see that they're stuck and they don't want to be, well, that's a simple problem to solve.
So how
I
do you,
think that,
yeah, go ahead.
well, so what comes to my mind is a quote from the singer Nico Case in one of her songs. She says, it was so clear to me that it was almost invisible.
Hmm.
We go along, we do the same things in the same ways because they work. We do them over and over and over until they become invisible. We don't even realize that there is another way. And there's a certain efficiency to that. Um, but in a world that is constantly changing, we have to as well. Um, you know, the way we did it yesterday is great until tomorrow changes, and tomorrow
Mhm.
is always changing. So, uh, you know, I think that it's important to continue to do the things that work well, but it's also important to test whether they are still working.
Yeah.
Is the right answer from yesterday still the right answer today?
I was having this very similar conversation with two of my product managers yesterday. And at the crux of it, I said, we have to constantly challenge the assumptions because an assumption was made that I think was leading us down the wrong path.
Mhm.
And in talking to a different team member who's essentially the owner of the product, we realized, oh my gosh, wait a minute. We're we're ignoring something here because of the assumption. And so that was what our conversation was about. Like, how do we challenge ourselves to look at things and say, is that actually still true? Is that still right? So going back to how you do keynotes and presentations and coaching with people, how do you use magic to challenge assumptions and get people to wake up to that concept of doing it themselves?
So I have a loose framework for how I use magic. And it's the same framework that I use for any of my sort of communication techniques, whether it be magic or optical illusions or stories. I introduce an idea. I illustrate that idea with magic, optical illusion, story, activity, something like that. Then I give the brief 2 cent interpretation of what I think it means.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ask a question because I know that I don't know anything about the people in the room. I
Right.
am almost invariably at an event, I'm the weird outsider who doesn't know anything about that industry. And that has its pluses and minuses. So I if I don't know anything about the people in the room, well, I can't presume to have the answers for them. So instead, I like to ask powerful questions that allow people to take something from what I've shared and apply it into their own world. because nobody in the room is better qualified to solve their problem than themselves.
True.
Yeah. So as far as how like why I use magic, I'll give you an example. So this is a 50-cent piece. It's an American 50-cent piece from the 1940s.
Okay, so those of you who are just listening, you're going to have to get over to YouTube and watch this because he's demonstrating a magic trick with a
That's a
coin.
good
This is
point.
awesome.
Right. So I've got a 50-cent piece. I'm holding it at the tips of my fingers, and then I'm going to rub it. I'm going to rub it just a little bit like so, and it slowly disappears. And it's completely gone. It's actually, well, it's not gone. It's invisible. It's actually right there. And grab it like so. When I squeeze it, it comes back. So it's a relatively simple piece of magic. Coin is vanished and then reappears. But what's happening is in your mind, all kinds of stuff is going on because you know deep in your bones that that's impossible, can't be done.
Mm-hmm.
But it happened right in front of your eyes. And so then that forces, I believe, that forces one of a number of different questions. One being, well, if I know that that's not possible and I just saw it happen, well, then what else do I think that I know for sure? Maybe I need to go back and double check the things that I think I know because maybe they're just assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing that's just happening is, all kinds of neurons are firing in a way that's like, what's going on? That is outside of my realm of normality. And when that happens, you're in that sense of wonder and awe. And as a tool for me, one of the byproducts is open minds.
Mm-hmm.
Open minds that are much more receptive to new ideas, much more receptive to questioning the way they've always done it. And then all I have to do is ask a good question and we're off to the races.
So I love that. Let's get this formula in a way. You're presenting a concept, you're using magic as your demonstration, but in that demonstration, you're forcing their brains to be more receptive, to be more open to new ideas. And then you plant the new idea.
Yeah. Yep.
I love that.
Plant
So we
a
have
new
to think about
idea
that.
and then ask a question that allows them to apply that new idea into an area of their life that I don't know anything about.
Yeah. I love that. And honestly, that's kind of the gold that we're looking for when we have a product or a service is how do we present it in a way that people will then be open to it and see it and want it and come ask us for it versus just everybody's out there with some widget, right? We want to change the dynamic. This is why I love the new perspective or the totally different perspective is like, how do we see this differently? Dan, I want to share a technique I have.
Oh, good.
Because I was really, really poor in college. And somehow I came across this idea that I needed to consider all the possibilities in order to find the best outcome. And so what I came up with is just a simple belief that for every choice I make, there are 43 options I could choose from. Now, why 43? Because it's a really big number if you think about it. If you're typically saying yes or no, true, false, white or black, 43 is a lot more to think about. The second reason is because what do we typically do as humans is we come up with the best outcomes first, the positive ones. What about the negative ones? If you don't consider the negative ones, you're missing out on the spark of inspiration that can come from seeing the negative and not wanting it and finding a different way around it.
Yes.
So I'll give you my example. There were many days I'd wake up on a Monday while I was in school, and I would literally, and I'm not exaggerating, I would have $5 to my name. And I had to get to Friday to get my paycheck. I had to have gas for the car, parking for the spot where I went to work. I had to have food. $5 didn't go very far. I mean, today it goes nowhere, but back then it didn't go very far. So I'd ask myself, what are the ways I can get money? And I would consider the positives. I could borrow it, I could earn it, but I'd consider the negatives too, and I wouldn't do them. I didn't want to steal. But you know what another negative one is? Selling something I don't want to sell. Or taking the bus instead of driving my car and avoiding parking fees.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if you can challenge yourself just by saying like, there must be more options than I'm considering, you can be open to it.
I love it. So I'm curious, with this idea of 43 different answers, would you sit down with a piece of paper and try to come up with 43 different ideas?
Sometimes my brain works in the ability to hold a lot of information at once. So I can see a spectrum of options very, very quickly in my head, and I can run through them, and I can do it super fast. It's just one of my gifts, I think, or my methodologies, if you will. But sometimes I'd write them down. If I'm really struggling to make a decision, I will write down pros and cons. I'll give it weightings, and I'll start to balance it out. And I'll say, oh my gosh, there's so much more in this column than the other column. I need to lean on this direction then to make my decision.
Wow, fascinating. You know, I love it. I love it. And it has me thinking about this this activity that I actually haven't used in my talks for a while. I should bring it back. This is another visual one, but I think if I describe it properly, people who are just listening can go along with us. So we can do this together. I'm going to position myself so that you can see me all right here. Hold your right hand out in front of you. So your elbow is at your side. Your right hand is palm up out in front of you. So the goal is get your hand palm down. What's one way that we can do that?
Flip it over.
Right. You just turn your wrist over. Great.
Yeah.
So that's the easiest, maybe the most obvious answer, but it's certainly not the only other answer. How else could we get our palm down?
Stand on my head.
You could stand on your head. Exactly. So that's another way. Might take a little bit of balance. And I love that you've immediately gone to something that's a little bit silly.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you got to be a little bit open to say that. So that's a great idea. How else?
Oh, sorry, I went all the way to the negative. Cut my hand off and flip it over.
You could cut your arm off, turn it over, problem solved. Fantastic. Now you've gone not only into the silly, but into the very impractical.
Right.
But that's okay. So we could continue on with this. And when we do, when I do this in a big group, a similar trend seems to happen. I ask how to do it. Everybody says, turn your wrist over. Great. And you can see their brains turn off. There, done, right. Problem solved. I figured it out. Next problem. And then I push. Well, how else? Oh gosh, okay, well, we got to come up with more, right? And it kind of stalls out. And then somebody finally says, stand on your head. And that gets a little chuckle. And then we get a couple more ideas, and then it stalls out again. And I push and I push. And then eventually somebody says, cut your arm off, turn it over, problem solved. That gets a bigger laugh, and you can feel the energy in the room change. You get like, oh, we don't have to be practical. Oh, we can be silly. Oh, and then we get this torrent of ideas, many of which are really silly, impractical, but some of which can at least contain the seed of something that is really innovative and useful.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that it's only by venturing out into the realm of the weird that we can access some of those really innovative new ideas, because we give ourselves permission to not be practical and to be silly and to be vulnerable. Really, we're talking about vulnerability here. And when we access vulnerability, it's a superpower.
Yeah.
So let me show you another way to do
it. Go for it.
Yeah, I'll show you another way. And I will try to describe this in a way that everybody can do it together. So right hand palm up in front of you, your elbow is at your side, and you're sitting up straight. Without changing the orientation of your hand, raise your hand up to your shoulder. Again, without changing the orientation of your hand, rotate your elbow so that your hand ends up in front of your left elbow. Again, without changing the orientation of your hand, move your hand back out in front of you where you started. Now your hand should be vertical. Again, without changing the orientation, move it up to your shoulder, down to your elbow, and back out in front. Now your hand is palm down. You turned it over without changing the orientation of your wrist.
What happens if we keep going? Oh, wait.
Yeah. Yeah. Eventually we run into physics. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And you're right. This is challenging how people see the world. And that's super important, I think, when you're trying to communicate, especially new ideas as an innovator. Oh my gosh, it is so hard to bring a new idea to life when people don't see it. And I don't remember how Steve Jobs said it. He said, if I listen to customers, they wouldn't get what they want. They don't know what they want. I got to show them what they want. Something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that is amazing. What has been like, I guess what has been your favorite trick to do in front of people and why?
Ooh. It depends on the scenario. It depends, if I'm just hanging around and doing magic for the sake of entertainment. There's a piece of magic that I learned from my friend and mentor, Dean Dill, that it only really works in certain circumstances when people are really settled and focused and we've got some time because it's a long routine, and the outcome is at once expected and yet completely impossible. It involves dice and cards, and it's complicated and absolutely wonder invoking. So there's that. But in terms of like the work that I do, uh, I think that one of the most powerful things that I do is how I kick off my keynote and workshop. It's a piece of magic where I borrow a bill of some sort. $100 bill is hilarious. The person signs their name across the face of it. It disappears. Then the person comes up on stage. They open up a little box that's been sitting there the whole time. Inside the box, there's a bag. They open up the bag. Inside the bag is a lime. They inspect the lime, make sure it's as it appears to be. We cut it open, and there inside the core of the lime is their signed bill. So
Man,
it's this classic stunner of magic. It only takes about 3 minutes to do the whole trick. And then we're off to the races. Then we're starting to talk about the fact that there's something that you know is impossible, and it happened 3 feet in front of you.
hmm
It's a lovely reminder that possibility is a question of belief. If you believe that something is impossible, well, then it's impossible. Because if you don't think it can be done, you're not even going to try. And if you don't try, well, what do you expect? But if you do
Yeah.
believe it's possible, whatever it is, even just a glimmer of a sliver of a possibility, then you're going to put in the work. And you try and you try and you fail and you try again until that thing that everybody thought was impossible becomes possibility. So when I do that whole thing, it's a lovely message. And I think it's true. It's important, I think, to convey. But then I tell this story because I know what people are thinking, right? It's a lovely message, but I know that people can't hear it because their brains are stuck on, how did that just happen? That's impossible. And that's what the human mind does, right? When it sees something that it doesn't understand, it immediately jumps into problem-solving mode.
Yeah.
And so until we address that question of how did I do it, I know that we can't move on. And so I invite people to share their theories about how I did it. And oh, Rich, the theories that I have heard, holy moly. Everything from the person who loaned me the bill and I are in collusion, right? He signed 2 different bills or something like that, to a trick lime or a trick knife or teleportation or all kinds of things. It's always very fun to hear all these theories. And then I tell this story. Do we have time for this story?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
I have something I want to observe about what you're saying, but go on.
So I tell this story of how it even came to be that I ask audiences, how did I do the trick, right? That is not a normal thing for a magician to do.
Yeah.
So this story is from about 10 years ago. I was doing a workshop for an executive leadership team. And I started the day with this lime trick just to get their attention and to make that point about possibility being a question of belief. And then I moved on. And at lunch, it became clear that I was the only one who had moved on, because the CEO of this company came up and said, "Dan, that trick with the lime is tremendous. I know how you did it." Really? How'd I do it? Oh, it was obvious. And then he told me his theory, and it was a good theory. It was plausible. And I asked him, are you sure? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Well, of course I'm sure. It's the only physical explanation for how you could have done that." So what I told him, and what I tell all my audiences, is that in the last 20 years of doing that trick, I've used at least a dozen different methods, at least 12 completely different physical techniques to achieve the exact same end result. And you could see the gears turning in his head. It was like his mind was exploding with the idea that there could have been more than one right answer.
Oh, my gears are turning. I'm thinking about that. Really? 12 different ways to do that? My goodness.
Well, yeah, and that's just me, right? Personally, I've used at least 12 methods. I know of dozens more than that I haven't used myself. So he thought about this, and then he said, "Well, all right, if that's true, that there's 12 different ways that you could have done it, and I was convinced that I had the only right answer, then I need to go back to the audience, or I need to go back to the office, and I need to look at all the things that I and my team believe that we have the only right answer for. We need to question those." I thought it was a great moment where he was starting to challenge his assumptions about the right way of doing things.
Yeah. So there's something really, really powerful I want everybody to get out of what you just said. You presented the impossible and challenged people to think about how it could be possible.
Yeah.
So that is so, so important when you're trying to innovate, when you're trying to change, when you're trying to break through somebody's roadblock, limiting beliefs, behavior problems, et cetera. You get others to think about how could this be possible. So somebody did this to me in my career. We had a need a long time ago, early on in our business, to save forms. They were PDF at the time, save them, come back and work on them. And I kept looking at this problem and I just kept saying, it's not possible. I cannot think of a way to make this possible. It is not possible. And the person I was saying it to was one of our partners. And he said, at one point, like a year and a half into this, he said, "You have to solve this for this customer." And I said, "Fine, I'll solve it." And then I did. Because he essentially said, "Well, he challenged me in a way. If you want to get me to do something personally, tell me I can't do it." So he essentially reversed it on me and said, "Well, you're right. You can't do it." I'm like, "Well, no, I can do it. I will find a way to do it." And then we invented a new product out of it because we solved a problem. And honestly, Dan, I think what a lot of people miss is that when you tackle the impossible, quote unquote, and you solve it, you elevate your game. You become a better provider of a service or product, and you actually create barriers to entry because nobody else is thinking they can solve it. And honestly, I mean, like our newest product I mentioned at the beginning called Form Extract, it extracts data off forms. We're solving a problem that people don't even realize is possible to solve. We do it with 99.9% accuracy, and the standard in the industry at best is 85% accuracy. And therefore, it's not adopted well because humans have to keep being involved in the process. But we can actually do it at near 100%, which means humans don't have to be involved. And it's that impossible thing. So I'm so glad you brought this up and we could talk about this today. And I think this method of ask how it would be possible is what spurs the innovation.
Yeah. It reminds me, back in the olden days, magic, now you can get magic tricks online. You can sign on to any given website, sign up and buy a trick and learn the trick immediately. Mm-hmm. Well, pre-internet, that obviously wasn't the case. You'd go to a magic store to buy magic. Well, if you weren't lucky enough to live in a town that had a magic shop, well, then you were stuck with catalogs. So right. The Abbott's Magic Company in Colon, Michigan published this enormous phone book sized catalog of magic every year. And it was page after page after page of descriptions of tricks with just simple line drawing illustrations of each trick. And I've got lots of friends who started magic as a kid. They couldn't afford the tricks, so they would read the descriptions and think, wow, I want to do that. And they would be forced to think of, all right, well, how would I do that? If I wanted to do that, how would I do that? And they ended up inventing methods that had never been invented before that were as good or better than the method that was being sold in the catalog.
Man.
So this idea of necessity being the mother of invention plays out in both of our examples.
Yeah, for sure. So, man, we're going to have to wrap this up. And before I do, I have another question for you. And before I ask that, what's the best way for people to find and connect with you?
Best way is through my website, dantrommater.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I'd love to chat.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So my last question is, who has had the biggest impact on your leadership style and how you approach your role?
You know, I'm not sure that I can say the biggest impact, because who knows? But the first name that comes to my mind is my mentor from community college, Barry Stearns. I was on a team of student advisors. So we ran the information desk. We ran the orientation programs at the school. We became a really close-knit group due to the guidance of Barry. Barry had this infectious belief in each one of us that we could do more than we thought we were capable of. I think that I owe Barry a lot in terms of my ability on a stage. I think before that, I mean, I've always liked to be the center of attention and all, but as far as standing on a stage in front of a whole bunch of people, that was a new thing. And Barry gently forced each and every one of the members of his team to stand on a stage in the auditorium and lead a session for an orientation program. And it was that belief in me and my abilities that really propelled me to all kinds of success in my life. So I owe Barry Stearns an awful debt of gratitude.
I love that. We are fortunate when we have mentors who believe in us, but that also is a reminder that when we believe in others, we empower them to be their best too.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. I got to give a huge thank you to Dan Trommater for being on this episode of The Customer Wins. Go check out Dan's website at dantrommater.com. Trommater has 2 M's in the middle, by the way, so dantrommater.com. And don't forget to check out Quick at quickforms.com, where we make processing forms easy. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We'll click the like button, share this with someone, and subscribe to our channels for future episodes of The Customer's Win. Thanks for joining me today, Dan.
It is absolutely my pleasure, Rich. May you be well.
Thanks for listening to the Customer Wins podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.